Hey guys, so I've been wanting to do what I'm gonna do today for a long time now, probably since 2008, back when it was at its peak. I'm going to be running two 2070 Supers in SLI. I know 2070 Supers haven't been out since 2008. I mean, just running cards in SLI. So I'm finally gonna do it today. I know you may say SLI is dead, but I'm doing it for craps and giggles. It's gonna be pretty crazy. It's gonna be sick, and it's gonna be super sicko mode. I finally got my hands on an SLI bridge. SLI! So I have two RTX 2070 Super Founders Editions. I've been wanting to run them in SLI for a while now. I just haven't got around to it, but today is the day. So I'm going to be comparing these two cards to a Founders Edition 3080. Do I think two 2070 Supers will outperform a 3080? No, I don't think so, but let's see what the flip happens. And because SLI is an older technology, it's not something that people utilize anymore. So I had to look through all my motherboards to figure out which one is actually compatible. The one in my Corsair case back there, it's a Z490 gigabyte Aorus master board. It says it supports SLI, so when I put it in and connect them with a bridge, hopefully it works. There isn't a lot of games out there that actually support SLI, but I have two games that actually do. GTA 5 and Shadow of the Tomb Raider say they both support SLI. So I'll run benchmarks and I'll game with those games. And then I'm gonna run some 3D Mark benchmarks. I'm gonna run some tests that I haven't ran in my previous videos, just so that there's more benchmarks we can compare to each other. I think they're both really pretty cards, but I still think the 2070 Super is nicer looking and it's a little flashier. They're honestly both great looking cards. So let me throw these bad boys in there. And because I have to use an older motherboard, it's a Z490 motherboard. I don't have the latest processor in there. It's gonna be paired with an i7-10700K, 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, and yeah, so these cards still have the connectors to connect an SLI bridge. This year with the 4080 and the 4090, they did completely away with it because apparently it's dead, and it is, but I'm reviving it. All right, so I'm gonna turn this bad boy on. Thing. That just looks so cool to me. That's a nice looking card, don't get me wrong, but that just looks sick. And it is booting, so I think we're good. Configure SLI. Okay, so yes, they are running in SLI right now. And ZXT Camp software just crashed, I don't know why. Maybe it just can't handle SLI. It's just it's probably just too like sicko mode for it. So if you're comparing the 2070 Super and the 3080 on paper, the 2070 Super only has 2,560 CUDA cores, which is very low when you compare it to the 3080's CUDA core count, which is at 8,704. So even when you combine the CUDA core count for both the 2070 Supers, it's only about 5,120 CUDA cores versus 8,704 on the 3080. So these cards are gonna have to pull over 3,000 CUDA cores out of their butts. 2070 Super has 8 gigs of GDDR6 RAM versus the 10 gigs of GDDR6X RAM on the 3080. They threw it in X because it makes it excellent. Excellent! And according to user benchmark, the 3080 in effective speed is 69% faster. When they did their benchmarks, they were getting about 65% better scores. So when you combine the two cards, if they're actually using full power, 215 watts is their power rating for the 2070 Supers, they should be using around 430 watts when you're utilizing them 100%, which is more than the 3080 at 320 watts, but that doesn't necessarily mean better performance. It just means they're using more power. So we'll see what happens. So I am gonna run the Furmark stress tests for about 10 minutes. I am a little concerned because there's two graphics cards in there. They do heat up. Right now, I'm only about a minute in, and the bottom one is definitely getting hotter, probably because it's being suffocated by the other card, and there isn't much clearance between the shroud that goes over the PSU. It only has about that much room, so there's a difference of about 10 degrees right now. Let's see what the max temp we hit is, and we'll compare it to the 3080. So I just finished the 10-minute Furmark test, and this computer is roaring. Definitely warm. It smells like hot plastic. That was one concern that I had because you have 2 GPUs in there. I was expecting high temps, which the temps were high. When you have just the 3080 in there, the max temp I got with the 10-minute Furmark test was 71 degrees Celsius, which is really good. But when I ran the 2070 Supers in SLI, one of the cards hit 76 degrees, which is honestly pretty comfortable, but the bottom card was hitting 87 degrees, which I would say is a not too comfortable temperature. Anytime your GPU is hitting the high 80s, you run the risk that it's gonna fail sooner. You really want your temperatures to be in the 70s, but it does make sense that you generate more heat. The Furmark tests, I've said it before, usually you're not running both cards at 100% constantly. This is just stressing it out as much as possible. So you probably shouldn't see these temps while just gaming, but yeah, those are not so comfortable temps. So when I ran Firestrike Extreme, apparently I got a legendary score. I'm not sure why it said I got a legendary score. It says the best score when you're using the same hardware apparently was 20,809. I got 21,087. I'm not sure if I just broke a record or something. I don't think that's accurate. I don't know. But that was my score, and I did beat the 3080. So when you compare it to the 3080, so the 3080 got 19,501, and the only test that the 3080 did better in was the physics test, which is actually your CPU, so that doesn't really count. So really the 2070 Supers beat out the 3080 in every category, except for maybe temps. It says the average temperature was 74 degrees versus 69. Now when you compare time spy, it said my score was good, nothing crazy. I still got a better score than 3080. I got 17,565 versus 15,918 on the 3080. And once again, for some reason, my CPU scores were better when I had the 3080 in there, but in every graphics test, I completely beat out the 3080. And it wasn't like neck and neck either. Like if you look at the 3D Mark score, it was 10% better. The graphics score was 14% better. The graphics test 1 was 11 and the graphics test 2 was 17%. So for me not thinking that the 2070 Supers were gonna beat out a 3080, that's actually not bad. Before filming this video, I don't know where I saw it, but it just said that no, 2 2070 Supers cannot beat out a 3080. I don't know who the source was, but I kind of was going by that. Oh, look, someone did it and they said it wouldn't. But according to the benchmarks, I am scoring better, at least in Time Spy and Firestrike Extreme. I really wanted to test this new benchmark that 3D Mark released. It's called Speedway. Only thing is, it's no longer compatible with SLI. So, lame. So right now I'm running the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark. We'll compare the average FPS and the number of frames rendered, and we'll see which one scores better. So for the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark, I did run ultra everything at 1440p. They were actually neck and neck when it came to average FPS. You got 188 frames per second on the 3080 versus 187 on the 2070 Super SLI. So total frames rendered with the 3080 was 29,518 as opposed to 29,276. So very close. To the naked eye, you probably wouldn't see a difference. Just the difference of 1 FPS average. So from what I've seen, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it does depend heavily on the CPU. So that's probably why you don't see that big of a difference. But it is interesting to see that the 3080 slightly beat it out because according to the other tests, at least all the 3D Mark tests, the 2070 Super has been beating out the 3080. Interesting to see. So let's move on to GTA 5. One of the few games that actually supports SLI. Everything's turned up to max settings. 1440p. Gaming was a different story. 3080, I actually wasn't getting quite 144 frames per second the entire time. You would see it drop, it would be in like the 120s, you would see it drop to the 90s. With the 3080, it dropped down as low as the 80 FPS. The thing is, with the 2070 Super, I saw it get down to the 50 frame per second area at times. So you would see it spike, and the spikes were a little more severe with the 2070 Super. Now, my temps were actually getting pretty hot. I was, for at least one of the 2070 Supers, I was hitting somewhere in the 80s, which that can contribute to maybe spikes in my FPS. The 3080 ran relatively cool. It was in the low 70s. For the 3080 and the 2070 Super, at times I could get 144 frames per second, usually when I was standing still. For some reason, every time I go to the beach where I'm seeing all these people work out, that's where my FPS drops a lot. I don't know why, but it's probably just having to process a lot more stuff. It was just interesting to see that in both Tomb Raider and in GTA 5, the 3080 did perform better. Now Tomb Raider, like I said, it didn't perform really better. It was 1 FPS better, but in GTA 5, I could see the difference. They both looked really good, but whenever the FPS dropped down to the 50s, that's what was the difference. I consistently saw the 2070 Supers in the 70s as far as FPS goes. The thing is, I never saw with the 3080 it dropped below 80. Even though all these benchmarks say the 2070 Super is better, it looks like when you're actually gaming, the 3080 will actually beat it out. What I think may be a factor is that it's heating up. At least one of the cards is heating up. It's hitting the 80s, and it could be thermal throttling that card, so you're not getting the full potential of that GPU, even though the other one's working. Now, I've also heard that you get 1.5 times the performance. You're not gonna double your performance, which I get that, but at least in this configuration, I've never had issues with heat in this case. So it could just be that these cars, they're not optimizing them for SLI, meaning even though they had the SLI capability, they didn't build the heat sinks and the fans on the GPU to do SLI. That's what I'm thinking, because it is a tight area. I feel like if SLI was still a thing, probably would have given it better heat sinks, maybe better fans. The 2070 Super by itself though is flawless. I have zero issues with temps. I just think maybe if I tested it in an open air case, or maybe if I open the window. But I didn't want to do that because I wanted to keep it fair. I kept the window closed with both. 3080 stays relatively cool, so that's why I didn't feel the need to open the glass. But anyways, the fact that there's hardly any games out there that support SLI, there's hardly any motherboards that support SLI as well. Nvidia completely dropped SLI with the 4080 and the 4090. Obviously this means SLI is dead. It doesn't make sense to do it. I already knew that going in. I just think it looks sick. I've always wanted to do it, whether it was SLI or Crossfire. I just wanted to test it. I remember my uncle, he had 2 Nvidia GeForce 8800 GTX I guess. Yeah, the GTX was after the number, not before. And he had them in SLI, and he said that thing was a beast. It could play Crysis on ultra settings. And at the time, that was just like, holy crap. You can play Crysis in the highest settings. It was back when Crysis was like, it was the benchmark. So ever since then, I was like, dang, I need to do an SLI configuration. By the time I got into building computers and stuff, SLI was pretty much dead, but it didn't stop me. Really, the only benefit to SLI nowadays is that it just looks, at least in my opinion, it looks pretty sick. If you're planning on putting them in a computer case, you're gonna have to make sure you have amazing cooling, because heat will definitely be an issue. Even if your benchmarks are scoring high, because if you look at the all-time scores for like Firestrike Extreme, for Time Spy Extreme, all those benchmarks, it's usually in an SLI configuration to get the best scores, but I don't think it accurately depicts what you're gonna get. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Most of the games that require a 4090 don't even support SLI. So even though you're getting these crazy scores in your gaming, you can't even run dual SLI. It looks like SLI is now just for the benchmarks. But anyways, that was fun. Shout out to my friend Jose, who let me borrow his 2070 Super. When I bought one, he got jealous, so he had to go buy one. So we bought one around the same time. He let me borrow it. But anyways, I am going to be putting another video out. I'm going to be testing the NZXT T120. It's an air cooler. I want to see how this air cooler compares to my Kraken X53 water cooler. I'll see if I have any other air coolers that I can test to compare. I'm gonna be cooling my 13600K, which can get hot. Be on the lookout for that video. If you like what you just saw and you like what you see, please leave a like, subscribe, and it's gonna continue to be very sicko mode as you keep watching my videos. But yeah, I think I'm done. Are we done? Yeah, we're done.